Hi, everybody, and welcome wherever you are in the world to this video interview with our guest today, who's Hubert from LinkFacts, who I'm going to introduce in just one moment. My name is Liam. I'm the founder of Biggerplate.com, and it's my pleasure to welcome Hubert as our guest. Hubert is joining us from Luxembourg, and he's going to give us a little bit of an insight into, if you like, the past, the present, and the future of LinkFacts. Now, Hubert, LinkFacts is still, I would say, a relatively new product. I think you were sort of started just a couple of years ago, but just maybe you could give us a brief introduction and maybe give us a little bit of the history or the background of how you came to start LinkFacts as a project, as a business, as a product.
Yes, hello. I'm happy to do so. LinkFacts as an idea originated a few years ago, let's say, and but my thoughts about information and semantic information and how information could be related to each other, and how the difference between information and knowledge is far away. Since 30 years, I'm thinking about this topic, and it's really something that is nearly obsessing me. Why I even think that in our physical representation and our science, we miss the notion of information quite a bit, and maybe that's the reason why we do not understand more about our world. So LinkFacts has formally been started in 2019 as a formal company, and for a year or so we just did development, pure development, and since a little bit more than a year now the platform is available for users, and since then we have been evolving and quite a lot.
So it's still a relatively new product, but clearly you've been thinking and working on these kind of ideas for some time, as you say. So maybe you could just, what do you mean by semantic information? Could you maybe just elaborate a little bit on what that means and how that relates to a tool like LinkFacts, which is this sort of part mind mapping, part concept mapping. It's really about sort of visualizing the connections between information. But maybe you could just explain to us, what do you mean by semantic information first off?
The Semantic Web is a term that has been coined and also discussed and proposed by the inventor of the internet itself. So the idea is that the links are as important as the data themselves, and the idea is that everything can be connected to everything else, but even more, everybody can claim that anything is connected to anything else. And this gives you a huge graph of what is and what people think, and you could consider it as a worldwide graph of that. And the question is, how can you make this idea, nearly religious or philosophical or holistic idea, tangible for a user, and how can you give the users the tools and the possibilities to link, to map his ideas, his concepts, whatever he wants to put into relation, and to give it some meaning. And this is meant by semantic. If both the nodes of typically a graph in our case have some semantics or some meaning, and the relations as well. And so you can map the meaning into such a graph.
So in terms of the LinkFacts product, as people can go and try that for free at linkfacts.link. And I suppose then the connection I would make with what you're suggesting is the ability in LinkFacts as a tool to put one piece of information here, another piece of information here, and then really a very explicit connection with an explanation. That's that point around the links being as important as the information themselves. And is that where you would sort of derive that that's where knowledge starts to appear instead of just information. It's how do these things connect and influence each other? That's when you start to build knowledge rather than just represent information.
Yes, the knowledge. If you just look at information in engineering, you know the term of white noise. It's just there's no signal there. There's just there's some signal, but it has no meaning, and it becomes only meaning when you start looking for something or looking at putting your view on something specifically. And I think that's also how our brain works. We constantly focus our eye on something, or we focus our mind on something, and this allows us in a limited context to generate knowledge and meaning. And so that's also the idea of a graph, that you can navigate a graph and you can always put your focus on some specific part of it, some location or some types of information in this graph.
And when you say a graph, you're sort of referring to that visual, that diagram structure. So what many people at Biggerplate would call a map, you think of as a graph, and they're sort of, I think, relatively interchangeable as terms, aren't they? I think you use the term graph, or would you see a distinction between something that's called a graph versus a map?
Yes, I see a distinction. First of all, the first notion is a tree, and typically mind mapping softwares, they handle trees. So they have a central concept, and around these concepts, they develop more and more branches and more and more capillary topics that are related. If you have a map, you have a tree where any endpoint can be connected to any other endpoint as well. So the tree is closed to a certain extent, but it's still two-dimensional. So if you think about a map with the roads, they do not cross. They have yes, you have crossings, but there is no third dimension. The graph is different in that way, that it's three-dimensional in a certain sense, because you can go from very far away nodes, you can connect them without crossing all the others connections that are on your way. And this is why we call it graph, because this limitation does not exist, and you can virtually connect anything to anything. And if you think about it, the tree, every map is a sort of addition or sum of trees. You can always take one node in your map and look from there. And if you look from there, it's your central node, and you have the branches that you typically have with a tree. And the same for the graph. So you could say the graph is a sum of maps, if you wanted to.
Yeah. And I think it's one of the things that we've talked a lot about over the years at Biggerplate with different software companies and our members as well, is it's not an either or situation. It's not mind maps or a sort of different kind of graph. It's different types of visualization, maybe for different types of purpose. So within LinkFacts, you've got a mode that you can switch on that's kind of more mind map focused, haven't you? And then you've got what I would suggest is the sort of the default mode, which is that more sort of concept mapping graph style. So as the developer, do you have any suggestions or feelings really around when should a user perhaps rely more on that tree structure, or when should they rely more on that graph structure? What are the sort of differences in the use case that you would be suggesting to people? Switch on the mind map mode in LinkFacts to do this thing, but maybe if you're trying to achieve this, the graph view is what you need. Where do you see the sort of the different use cases for the different visual?
If for instance, so first of all, it's as you said, the difference lies in the use case, but the difference lies also in the maturity. So if you quite often you start with a mind map, and as a problem or your view on a problem or on a topic gets more complete, you realize that there are links between the endpoints, and then suddenly you are in the map. So it's more, I would say that the concept map is more a sustainable way of mapping knowledge, whereas the tree is just a first brush, let's say, of your environment, and quite often it stops there and it's thrown away afterwards. And this is always what I could not understand. You go into a meeting, you brainstorm about something, you have a good mind map, and if everything goes well, it ends up in some report. But it does not live. It has no future. But there's a graph and the map may have a future, and you can maintain them over time, and you can extend them over time without breaking anything, and just by enriching them. And this is the idea that we had. And when you say when should I use the one or the other, in my opinion, whenever you have something that is the sort of a taxonomy, if you say, okay, I have my requirements, I now do requirements gathering, and I want to structure them in functional and non-functional requirements and so on. So whenever you have some taxonomy that you develop or that you have at your hand for filling it, typically you are inside a tree. But whenever you have something where you want to look with different perspectives on the same problem, let's say you have the use cases of LinkFacts, and you look to these use cases from the sector you are looking, or from the department in your company. So you can say, okay, what are the use cases from a sales perspective or from an HR perspective, which is different than saying, okay, what are the use cases in the automation sector or for the knowledge worker and so on. So, and that is also what I think, whenever you have different perspectives, you are quite rapidly in some graph mode. And this, everybody knows it. Everybody who has tried to organize a file store, sorting about according to the years and the months, or sorting about the first letter of the customer, or sorting about the maturity of the project, and they never match together. But in the graph, they match together. You just take a different perspective and you look to the same data from a different way.
So you're putting sort of a different lens on the same data, but yeah, as you say, to organize all of these files behind me in one way versus another is quite restrictive. And that's, I suppose that's almost part of the restrictions of the tree structure, is you sort of have to decide to put it in a position. Whereas with the sort of concept map graph view, you've got that ability to look at that same position, but from different lenses, and understand it with a different sort of lens.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I've always sort of viewed it, and I've spoken with other developers of kind of different tools as well. I've always thought of it a little bit like a family tree that sits in this tree structure, because it's very linear and it's very kind of structured in that way. But the tree structure doesn't tell you which family members don't get on with each other, which family members hate each other, which family members don't speak anymore. Whereas your graph view, your concept map view, that's maybe where you can start to see the dynamics between these different members, regardless of where they sit in the taxonomy, if you like, of that family structure. So yeah, I can absolutely get your point. I think the other point you make that's really interesting is to think of the mind map as the early stage tool or structure, perhaps, and the more concept map or graph view is maybe that later stage, and when the information is maybe better understood. I think that's a really interesting point, because we will quite often talk about mind mapping as being the upfront thinking tool for all different types of processes, or for lots of different types of processes. And I suppose your point around a mind map reaching a level of clarity and then sort of being thrown away, or for that clarity to then be pushed into a Word document or a big text document where that clarity gets lost again. I hadn't really thought about the idea that you could use the mind map as your brainstorm to think, right, what information do I want to carry forward? And then once you're clear on that, you have the mind map as your record, but you might just choose a few of those key points to then bring into the graph structure to start to understand how they sort of interrelate and influence each other. So yeah, quite an interesting idea to think of a mind map as a step towards a concept map, actually, as a sort of gathering tool that then informs a better quality concept map. Because I don't know if it's your experience, Hubert, but one of the things I have found when people have asked me about concept mapping, and we've maybe tried to do some concept mapping, is almost the lack of forced structure can mean people get a bit confused and a bit lost, because they add lots of things which eventually they'll realize are not that important and probably don't belong. If they'd gone through the mind map process first, they get all the ideas out, they organize and figure out what matters, and then they pull the important stuff into the concept map to start realizing how those things connect. And do you find with the concept mapping sort of graph view that people kind of know where to start, or do they maybe sort of just add a lot of stuff and then have a lot to clean up afterwards?
I think that anyway, when you are structuring thoughts and your ideas, it's thinking by itself. So you need to think about it a little bit, what you want to achieve, and accordingly you would structure. For me, the big advantage of concept mapping in this case is that you develop your structure while you are working. So you can change, you can link to concepts, and afterwards you discover that there is another concept in between, and you can do so. Or you can say, okay, my link is not a link of composition, but it's a link of inheritance, for instance, a different concept. You just re-affect the link type in that way. And this, in my opinion, is a very efficient way, because we are not able to know it all from the start. And this is a lot of development technologies like agile planning and agile developing is based on this, that you cannot anticipate all the effects of something, and it's just the world is too complex. But what you can is can start from somewhere and go a few steps further, and then when you are there, then you can maybe look back, or you look sideways and complete your picture. And I think this is the idea, that we are even not able to assimilate all the complexity of the world that surrounds us from the start, but we can gradually discover it.
So in terms of LinkFacts today, the tool, the product, as you say, that the challenge you're trying to help people and organizations with is complexity and unknowns and information gray areas and things like that. So if we took the LinkFacts product today, you've got a real sort of in-depth sophistication, I think, in terms of those links between topics. So I can put myself over here and Hubert over here, and then the sophistication and the thought that's clearly gone into the product in terms of defining what that dynamic is, that connection is really quite, it's not just sort of default stuff. It's really been very deeply considered, the options you're giving people. So I'm assuming those options you're providing are being informed by the people you see using the product already. So who are those users? Who, if LinkFacts has been available publicly for a year or so, or a year or two, who are those early adopters of the product, and what are they trying to get out of it? Why are they coming to you and saying, I'm going to use your product because I have this problem? What are the sort of the early stage customers and users for LinkFacts?
So first of all, we started with a product that was single user in a certain way, and only a few months back we released the organization LinkFacts for Organizations, and this is also the reason why the organization start working with us. The first users are of all kinds. A lot come from education, from research. Some of them are book authors, for instance, that try to map their ideas and structure their book. So instead of starting with a Word document and the structure is in the headings, they first do a graph. Other topics are really topics of taxonomy, of structuring topics. If you think, for instance, about types of, let's say you have a job portal, and you think about how to structure the skill sets and how to structure the different jobs, for instance. This is a complex task. These are things that have been done with LinkFacts already. I think that's one of the difficulties that we have, is that we have no focus group that is very specific, and we do not want to get into. We consider ourselves as providing visual thinking and the semantic data solution, and we do not want to get into some specific area. One example that we currently have is architects. They have to structure their buildings. If you think about a building, it has different buildings, and it has different levels, and it has different rooms inside a level. Inside the room, it has different surfaces, and inside it has different equipment, electricity and climate and so on. So, and to structure this and to keep this in sync with 3D models that they have of some building, that is one of the tasks, for instance, that we are currently working on with some architects.
So they're sort of using LinkFacts as almost a knowledge base for that building. So, and I suppose that's one of those examples where if you break down a building complex, as you say, you might have 4 buildings. Each building has 8 rooms. Each room has its fittings. Now, in a mind map, you could break that into the tree structure, but probably there are some commonalities in all of those rooms, like an electricity supply or a gas supply, that actually in the graph view, you're going to be able to sort of look through that window and say, right, let's look at the gas supply. Where's that coming from? Let's look at the electricity. And rather than having it represented in all these different places, you have it as a sort of a common thread through all. So they're using LinkFacts to sort of pull together documents. It's got fantastic ability to kind of pull in PDFs and other documents and sort of almost store everything in the graph for quick access. So, and I suppose the beauty of that, as you talked a little bit earlier about, is it's this living, breathing, dynamic document, I suppose. So maybe if in 10 years' time they come back to do some renovations on the building, that document is going to be full of guidance information, even if they don't realize it at the moment, to be able to say, okay, what did we put in place here, or what did the previous architect put in place? Do you see that kind of knowledge base use being a key idea for LinkFacts?
Yes, it's a few ideas combined. One is just having a jump board, like your bookmarking in your browser, but in a more sophisticated way, because you can mix documents and links, and you can mix data connections and nodes as well. That's one part of it. The other part of it is that if you think about what typical companies do, they have silos of IT applications. And the real interesting knowledge is not in the CRM or in the HR system or in the ERP system, but the real knowledge and the real wisdom of the company is in the heads of the employees. And it's doing the links, the implicit links between all those silos. And they have no tool for this. They have Excel sheets, they have Word documents, pen and paper. That are the tools that they have currently. Or meetings, but they have no tool that allows them in a flexible way to formalize this. And LinkFacts also help in that sense.
So it's a really interesting use case. This idea, this phrase of kind of tacit knowledge. So when Hubert leaves the company, what knowledge is he taking away that the company doesn't understand, the company doesn't know? He knows the little shortcuts. He knows that if you want to get this thing done, speak to this person, not that person. These sort of little nuances and realities of working world. And we've seen in the past people trying to do sort of exit interviews. So when somebody leaves the company, doing an exit interview using mind mapping, because it's a good way of capturing and organizing all of this information. But even as you speak, you realize the limitations of a mind map in that regard. It's good for the capturing, but you then need to be able to sort of plug that into that larger schematic, if you like, of well, how does that person's knowledge connect with all the other knowledge that we've connected from all of the other exit interviews? So to build up that, that sort of semantic web graph, if you like, of knowledge of all these people. I mean, it's a big task, but it would be quite an interesting thing. And I suppose would you see, I guess one of the challenges with something like that might be the curation of the graph. So is there a risk that graphs like that could just explode and become so big that they cease to be useful? Do you need to have somebody sort of in the curation role saying, okay, we've got a bit of duplication here, or we've got a bit of a sort of anomaly over here that doesn't fit? Do you need somebody to sort of take that curator role?
Yes. As a curator role can have many phases. One phase is that you collaborate on a single graph. So if more users work on the single graphs, automatically the result or the product is some curated view of it. That is, of course, one way. The other way is to structure things that you can define templates, and you can say, okay, I define a template with some node types and some connection types that are allowed between these node types. And this you can do currently already with LinkFacts. You can say, okay, I make a template, let's say for developing the test cases for my software, and I'm structuring this in a certain way. I explain what is a use case, what is a test case, what is a bug, and so on, and which relations are allowed for this. And then the other users can create a graph that inherits this template and all the definitions you have made. So you can structure it that way if you want, but still you can leave it open to the user. If he comes up with a new idea that you didn't anticipate in your structuring work, he still can do this. And I think this is the strength of it. But of course, there's a risk. You can, if you have no limits and no boundaries and no conventions at all, it might go in all directions. But you can prevent this by predefining templates, for instance. Yeah. Another way is you can have different layers of inheritance. So you can say, okay, the users inherit something, a global view that somebody else has done, and they just extended this global view in their own graph. But this own graph is a part of a consolidated bigger picture that I can visualize and navigate.
Yeah. So I suppose it's really not different to any other kind of documentation control in an organization. Is you sort of have to create the guardrails, yes. The sort of the rules of the game. I suppose the difference perhaps with a tool like LinkFacts is those guardrails can give a little bit. They can, if somebody comes in and thinks, actually, I can see a better way of doing this, the tool is going to enable them to kind of explore and experiment with that without sort of throwing the whole thing away, which is quite powerful, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And you have, for instance, if you think about discovery maps, if you have complex sales and you meet your prospect or your customer, what he throws at you is just concepts and ideas and requirements, and it's a mix of everything. And you can capture this as a mix of everything, and only afterwards you can start structuring it, and you can categorizing things, reconnecting them, and so on. And so there a structure would be detrimental to your progress, but the structure is needed afterwards, and you can bring these structures in the process afterwards.
Yeah. Really interesting. I think the other use case you touched on there, which is one that I could definitely see, is software testing. Where there's a big community of software testers who use mind mapping tools, and I suspect they would be as interested in that kind of mind mapping plus concept mapping dynamic to sort of work through these things that don't always fit nicely into tree structures. It's helpful if they do, but sometimes there are these kind of slightly more fluid things, and you need that sort of larger schematic view. So I can imagine some software testers and the testing community taking quite an interest in LinkFacts as a tool and a methodology, particularly if you've kind of, as a company, I've seen that you've built in a number of templates, and as I said earlier, you've kind of gone to a level of detail and sophistication in defining those links that I'm not sure others have gone to. So people can pull out, you've got some great videos on YouTube even of how to create my family tree sort of map, and the sophistication that you guys have built into the product already around these templates is phenomenal, to say how people are connected and what the dynamics are. So I'm sure for software testing to have some of that work done already is going to be very powerful. So in terms of where we're up to, Hubert, with LinkFacts today, you said you've gone from sort of single users early stage to now you've got organizations starting to use the tool, like your architects using it as a sort of a knowledge-based building tool. So where do you see LinkFacts going in the next couple of years? You're trying to avoid getting too narrow with your user base. You're trying to sort of remain accessible and open to kind of how people want to use that. So what's kind of coming next in the next few years, and the direction of travel that you can see at the moment?
One thing that there are a lot of ideas that have been implemented where we have a starting point, but where we do not have the maturity from the user experience that these features are really used. For instance, the idea is that you can add some knowledge to somebody else's graph, and that you can suggest it to him. So let's say I make a graph about Greek mythology, and somebody comes around who is an expert in this, and he said, yes, but here is something that you completely missed. Or you do Bible studies or whatever the topic is. And this idea that you can, a little bit like Wikipedia, that you can extend somebody else's graph. This is something that is important, and also communication, that you get notified when somebody added something to his graph and so on. So there's a lot of things to be improved from a user experience point of view. One major thing that we will most probably do, but it's still under discussion internally, is the workflow engine, a simple workflow engine, but mainly that the idea of clickable checklists, for instance. You have a checklist and you want to click it off. How are you doing this? And this is something that we most probably will provide over the next few months to our users. Of course, there's always a danger that you do something that is too powerful and is meant to be able to handle any situation, and then it gets utterly complex. And this is what we want to avoid as well. So it's a little bit a trade-off that you have between simplicity and straightforward usage and the powers that the data behind can provide you. Already now we have the idea of attributes attached to nodes and to connections, and of filters that are conditional. So for instance, if you have a family tree, you could create a filter that is showing you the people that are still alive versus those that passed away, things like that. So there's a lot of data in the background that the user at first sight does not see, but that we want to develop further and even to make it more useful. Because if you just have a graph as a template for some process or some flow, you can also say, okay, but then I want to execute it. I want to execute instances of it, and I want to be able to refer to it later on and so on. So this is one of the complexities. The other thing is the versioning. And now the graph is just a photo, a snapshot of what currently is there, but you have no possibility to get back in history. Yeah. And we want to be able to get back in history, and even to the very first node you started creating the graph. And this would also solve some problems when you have templates that evolve and people use template. We do not want to copy the template, but we want to have a pointer to a specific state of the template. And so the template can evolve and your graph can evolve and nothing is broken because of that. And these are some challenges that we are currently working on.
These are some pretty big challenges, but I see immediately the sort of overlap of those challenges. I suppose that ability to see how a graph has evolved, developed, changed, grown, that's potentially going to be particularly useful if your other idea of allowing other people to contribute to your graph, that's going to become quite important, because you might take somebody else's suggestion and add it, and then it might grow and evolve, but you might want to be able to go back to a point in time to say, here's how it looked before I started adding other people's knowledge to it, or before we got to a certain point. So I can see that, yes, that ability to sort of see the history of it and see the growth and the evolution of it would be very useful, as well as probably quite novel, to almost be able to see a time lapse of how this graph has grown and evolved is going to be pretty powerful. And I suppose one of your challenges as a developer to try and help your users is, when these graphs do get quite big, you've got to make sure you're helping people to still be able to navigate around them and use them usefully, so they don't become just an overwhelming big thing. So I suppose things like you mentioned around filtered views, or actually I want to go from sort of my everything view to my workflow view. I want to see a narrower slice of the picture to execute some things, or I want to see a filtered view. So I suppose as the potential features and functions enable people to build bigger and more complex graphs, your challenge as the developer is to say, right, how can we help them handle that data, handle that volume, that complexity, without being overwhelmed by the graph itself?
Yes. So yes, there are a lot of even simple things. For instance, the handling of bulk nodes and connections. How I have a graph, I want to split it into two graphs.
Great.
This is not a trivial task from an user experience point of view. It's not a trivial task. From a data point of view, it's quite simple. But this kind, or if I have organized my graphs in a few inheritance hierarchies, and now I want to flatten them again. I want just to flatten them again. This as well. So a lot of little user experience challenges that are complex from the user experience, not too complex from the data management point of view. And this is something that we want to improve, and also where we rely on our users to give us the feedback. That's a very important part.
Yeah.
The software lives by the feedback of the users, and the more we get, the more useful feedback we get, the more we can, of course, implement and get rid of potential constraints or problems the software has.
Yeah. So I think our time is nearly up, Hubert. So as a closing thought, then, you talk about how the software lives or dies by the feedback and the use case that you see from your users. So if people watching this wanted to come and experiment with LinkFacts, they can go to linkfacts.link, and you have a free free account that they can create and start to experiment with the software immediately. So that's hopefully something we can point people across to you. And if people then, you've now got in the product the ability, if people do want to go further and do more, they can upgrade to paid plans. But the free access to LinkFacts, what's that going to give people as a way of just experimenting and starting to use the product?
Yes, they can start with this, and there is no functional limitation on it. So there's just what we limited is the number of private graphs a user can use. So public graphs is not really limited, but private graphs is limited. And once people are using it for their professional business, of course, we want to get some remuneration for our work.
You've got to keep the lights on somehow. Yeah.
Exactly.
Brilliant. So I think it's fantastic. So there's a fully functional version that people can come across to linkfacts.link and try out the software. It's really, really interesting. You could lose yourself almost in time because there is such depth to it that you don't even realize is there at first. You can build out very simple schematics and graphs. And then if you sort of just try and spend a little bit more time, you can get really into the depths of it, and you realize just how much you've built into the engine, if you like, of that software. So I would very much encourage anybody watching to head on over to linkfacts.link and certainly sign up for a free account and do some experimentation. And importantly, as you experiment, feel free, I think, Hubert, you would say, to contact Hubert and his team and give them your feedback. Tell them what you were trying to do, what you were trying to achieve. Really responsive team, really trying to learn from their users. So every extra user story is potentially going to help you to shape the product even better for people.
Exactly.
Yeah, perfect. So Hubert, it's been a pleasure to talk to you today, and it's a pleasure to be partnering up with LinkFacts, and we're hopefully going to be doing lots of interesting things together between us over the coming weeks, months and years. So thank you very much for joining us today and giving us a little insight into the LinkFacts story, and we wish you all of the best of luck with all of those big development decisions and priorities you've got to now decide, and we look forward to seeing how it goes from there.
The pleasure is mine, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Hubert.
Yeah.
Take care.
See you. Yeah, take care. Bye-bye.